Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. This is the ARPA Institute discussion today. And before we start, I'd like to say a few words about the ARPA Institute activities in Armenia and also introduce our 33rd anniversary celebration banquet, which will be held on May 10 in the Sheraton Universal. And you're all welcome. You can see the announcement on our website or on the media. I'm sure there are a lot of advertisements. But our main activities are in Armenia, and we've been working there for 33 years now. And we currently have several projects that we consider important and impactful. One of them is a clean room, the first class 1000 clean room that was established in the Alekhanian National Lab about 3 years ago, and now it is functional, and people have started using it already. The first satellite, the Armenian satellite, was actually built in the clean room. So the purpose is to do advanced research, especially that kind of research which requires a very clean environment. And then we have established also a new Center of Excellence for Circuit Design in the Polytechnic University, where we already have 47 students, are being trained in advanced circuit design using internationally recognized program software by Cadence. And the main objective is to have large companies like NVIDIA and AMD to be interested in Armenia and to bring in more work for Armenia. And also, of course, to do advanced circuit design, in other words, do research and development also eventually. And we have a large educational program that involves 19 schools from different regions in Armenia. It's a STEM education program where the students learn project-based uh, approach and innovation to be innovative as much as possible. And we also encourage for students to participate in the National Science Fair that is being held now every year in the National Academy of Sciences. We have started the science fairs in Armenia in 2017, and in 2018, the government adopted it, and they started doing the National Science Fair as of 2019. And we also have our annual invention competition for young scientists. And this year we had 7 projects that was submitted. Out of these 7, the committee decided that 2 of them are winners, and they each will receive $5,000. And of course, we encourage them to continue their research and advance it as much as possible, make it more essentially uh, commercially available, even if possible. And we also, of course, work with the universities and the Academy of Sciences, several institutes like the Institute of Physical Research, Institute of Chemical Physics, Molecular Biology Institutes, and others. We provide them instrumentation and guidance, and sometimes experts attend these institutes and give lectures. Our main objectives are to advance education, science, culture, and many other areas as much as possible, and we try to do our best. Today, our uh, discussion will be about TUMO, and we are very happy to have today uh, the title of the project is Empowering the Next Generation the impact of the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies. And Pegor Papazian will be presenting TUMO, and our own Ani Shabazian will be moderating the discussion. I'd like to introduce Ani right now. Ani Shabazian is a PhD, and she's a professor history. She's a professor at LMU, Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. She's a major in history and psychology from UCLA, and then on human development in psychology from Harvard University, a second MA from UCLA, and PhD in urban schooling. And Ani has served as a faculty for several universities before teaching at Loyola Marymount, like in Budapest, Hungary, and Reggio in Italy. And she has been the executive director at UCLA Infant Development Program, and now is the director of the Loyola Marymount University, and also an associate professor for the School of Education. She's the director, as I said, of the Children's Center, and she's very active in the community and also very active in our ARPA Institute herself. Ani, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Papazian. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. You took me back so many years. Thank you all for joining today. Good morning and good evening to those of you tuning in from Armenia, including our guest speaker here today, Pegor Papazian. I would like to thank the ARPA Institute for featuring this conversation on TUMO with Pegor Papazian. Through their steadfast work in Armenia, the ARPA Institute continues to serve as a steady reminder for us all that progress can be made together. Our objective with our time here today is to share some of the thinking surrounding the creation of this world-class institution, the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies. TUMO is a free-of-charge educational program that really redefines education by putting students in charge of their own learning. Our esteemed panelists here today will share about TUMO and analyze some of the key educational issues and international implications that have come about as a result of the creation of the TUMO centers. I look forward to all of us listening closely and engaging with our speaker. I would like to give voice to each of you, and so I will ask a series of questions initially, and then I think the audience would like that. I think you would like to hear, and what I don't address, I'll make sure to turn over on the second half of the conversation to you, so that you could write questions in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and address them to Pegor Papazian. And so let me tell you a little bit about our guest speaker here today. Pegor Papazian is the Chief Development Officer of TUMO Center for Creative Technologies. He graduated from the Booth School of Business of the University of Chicago and has a Master of Science from MIT, where he worked on artificial intelligence and design automation. He has been the CEO of the National Competitiveness Foundation of Armenia and head of program development at the United States Agency for International Development. Pegor has played a lead role in developing TUMO's educational content and user interface. Thank you for your time here today, Pegor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
There is a little bit of a time lapse, so I appreciate your patience in waiting for the back and forth between me and Pegor. In the spirit that life can only be understood backwards but must be lived forwards, for our viewers here today, I'd like to begin by asking you the simple question, Pegor. Well, not so simple, but to imagine if someone has never heard of TUMO. How would you describe the creation of TUMO, the vision of TUMO, how it came about, and a little bit of the social history surrounding TUMO?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me. And I'm seeing a lot of familiar names pop up on the Zoom call. Hello, everyone. And thanks for joining. Yeah, so TUMO is for those who don't know the details, maybe it's worth repeating, kind of going over the basics. It's an after-school program at its simplest form. For teenagers, it's free of charge. And our strategy in a way is to empower kids to take charge of their own education and develop technical skills or skills in technical areas across technology and design as a means of really targeting some of the more core aptitudes, what sometimes are called soft skills, which are the ones that are going to matter after, let's say, Python and Photoshop are things of the past when they grow up. But we do focus on everything from, we have 14 different skill areas that we cover, everything from coding, robotics, AI now, game development to artistic or design topics like graphic design, web development, filmmaking, animation, motion graphics, music composition. And the curriculum is very unique in that it allows learners to combine as many of these skills as they would like in an interdisciplinary way. And in negotiation with our software, our learning platform, to generate personal learning paths. So each student has a unique and different learning path that they follow over the course of, on average, 2.5 years. Some stay less, some stay more. And they come twice a week, once a week, depending on where they are on the program.
Pegor,
Following the path that, yes.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I didn't want to interrupt, but can you go a little bit further back and say why the need arose? How did TUMO come about? Even what was the concept? Who were the founders? What was the vision? Just why even establish TUMO and when it was established? A little bit of the history before we delve into the current situation.
Right. I'm very fond of breaking that start with the why rule because sometimes the what
Okay.
really helps anchor things. Yes, back to the why. Maybe even the origin story. So
Yeah.
So Mary Lou, my wife and kind of my boss, the CEO of TUMO, and the one who kind of started the program, had been doing online education with Armenia and the diaspora for a while. And when we moved to Armenia 20 years ago with our family of five young kids, they entered the education systems at different levels of the public education system, from really kindergarten all the way to high school. And we realized that Armenia had inherited really a very Soviet kind of education system with all the advantages of that, like very strong emphasis on math and physics and so on, but also some of the, let's say, more antiquated aspects. And so we felt from the beginning a need for kind of what we sometimes call an antidote to that, or a complement for kids to have a space where they can deal with more modern topics, but also a more modern way of learning, more creative, more student-centered, and so on. And at that time, Sam Simonia.
Sorry, Pegor. One quick question.
Yeah,
By antiquated learning methods, did you mean like rote memorization and more like pencil and write? Like how did you mean it was more antiquated in the Soviet era?
Yes, very lecture-based.
Uh-huh.
Lecture-based, a lot of rote memorization, but also, crucially, very oriented towards discovering and nurturing elites. So the whole school system seemed to be kind of designed to find the smart kids and nurture them and bet on them. And they not only was that problematic because it left a lot of other kids by the wayside, but also the system was very bad at picking these smart kids. So kind of arbitrarily, some kids would be identified as kerazantsig, the high achievers. And the poor kids would suffer because they had no choice but to get high grades. And when they didn't, it was assumed they had a bad day. So in that sense, it was not a nurturing environment and not an environment that was good at fostering each student's potential to its maximum.
Thank you.
And so
You started to say Sam Simonian had, yeah.
Yeah, so when we had moved to Armenia, after we moved to Armenia, Sam Simonian, our founder and benefactor, basically had built an office building, almost completed, a very nice, large one. And he wanted to devote the first floor to something philanthropic, something for education for young people. And he found Mary Lou's work online and contacted her and said, would you be willing to do something along those lines in the first floor of my building? And Mary Lou and I spent a weekend writing a 20-page document, which we called Imagine, sent it to Sam. And he wrote back, are you free next weekend? Can you come to Texas? And that's how it started.
Wow.
Yeah, and we went to Texas. We really clicked. He contributed greatly to really taking that concept and helping us design it at the implementation level, and asked Mary Lou, who he realized had a construction background, to help finish the building and start TUMO. And very soon afterwards, basically donated the building to the foundation, the Simonian Educational Foundation that we established, in order to assure its sustainability. So now TUMO occupies the first 2 floors of this building, and the upper floors are rented out to tech companies, some that were headed by people who I'm seeing on this call, who have been our tenants. And that really laid very strong foundations for this institution that then started growing and growing, which we can talk about.
No, that situates it beautifully. So how many students did TUMO start with?
Yeah, we always rack our brains to come up with that original number, but it was in the hundreds.
Oh, okay.
And we were convinced we would get to at least 1,000. We used to say we're sure we're going to get to 1,000 students. That was very quickly surpassed. Now we have only Yerevan, we have almost 14,000, over 14,000 students that attend on a weekly basis, and in Armenia, 25,000. And Sam was generous enough and visionary enough to keep investing in capacity. We increased the number of floors. We started opening on weekends. We increased the number of sessions to the point where we could reach that capacity.
So it started in 2011. And now we have gone from a couple hundred students to thousands and
So 25,000 in Armenia attending every week, and 35,000 if you count the worldwide, the centers, international centers outside of Armenia. And so at the beginning, I was always involved, helping on weekends, volunteering, but I had another job.
Oh.
And some years later, Mary Lou made me quit my day job and come join her because the thing was growing so much.
Wow.
And since then, I've been involved full time. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And you had a flagship site. It started in Armenia, in Yerevan, right? And it expanded.
Mm-hmm.
What was your second site? Was it the Gumri site or?
Actually, the second was Dilijan, and then Stepanakert and Gyumri. And those 4 locations, Yerevan, Dilijan, Gyumri, and Stepanakert, were for years the only 4 centers, until we worked up the courage to say, okay, we want TUMO to be available to every single Armenian teenager within 40 minutes of their house at most. And that's when we started building more centers and came up with this idea. Mary Lou came up with the idea of a TUMO box, which, when we look at Armenia's map, I mean, a lot of the population is spread outside of, half of it is in Yerevan. But when you go to places like Gümri and Vanatsor and Ireknatsor and so on, they're surrounded by a large number of small towns and villages where much of the population is. So to reach those locations, we couldn't have large centers like the ones in Gümri and Stepanakert and Dilijan. So we came up with the idea of a TUMO box, which is three recycled shipping containers put together into a lightweight classroom we can deploy anywhere, and which has a hub and spoke relationship with the nearest large center. So Gümri, for example, has, I think, 6 or 7 surrounding villages like Maralik and others that feed into it. And it now has a capacity of 4,000 students. They don't all come from Gümri. Many of them come throughout the year from these boxes to the workshops in the main center. We bus them over. We supply the transportation.
And how does the box work? Can you talk a little bit about that? Could anybody benefit from this?
Well, yeah, first of all, TUMO is open to anybody. You just have to be the right age and the resident of Armenia.
Okay.
And yes, we have a waiting list of several thousand typically, but some kids who have been with us for over 2 years, 3 years, they leave and others take their place. So the waiting list usually is a 5-6 month waiting list, which is workable. So it's first come, first served. The boxes, to understand them, you have to know that TUMO has 3 modalities, we call them. The self-learning, which is with the help of coaches who are not teachers per se, but who are just helping you get unstuck. You engage with these hundreds of tutorials and activities that we've developed in an environment which is not necessarily group-based, so that's the individual part of the curriculum. And then once you've mastered 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 of these activities, let's say in graphic design, you earn the right to go into what we call a workshop. And the graphic design workshop will last a month, so 4 weeks to 16 hours basically over 4 weeks. And then you go back to self-learning in order to pick up the prerequisite activities that will earn you the right to go to the next level of graphic design or to some other area like programming, for example. And so in the boxes, you do the self-learning. So in a place like Yerevan or Gymri, you would do both self-learning and workshops in the main center. But if you live in a village, you do the self-learning, which is the majority of your time in the village, in the TUMO box. And we take you to the main center when you're ready to participate in workshops. And the beauty of that is in that workshop, you meet kids from other villages who you would have never otherwise met. So they start realizing that there's a whole kind of rural, let's say, ecosystem around a city like Gymri, and they start getting acquainted with kids from other villages in that workshop environment. So that's how that works.
Makes total sense. So this is, I mean, it sounds very different from other educational programs. I mean, if you could situate it with, I know there's several educational programs in Armenia, KOF, Teach for Armenia, Armat. Is this what makes it different? That try sort of if you could speak a little bit more to what makes it very unique. Is it this approach, this pedagogical approach?
Yeah, there are a couple of things, and we've found out that it's unique, and even if you compare it to other education systems around the world, because we've been interacting a lot now with our kind of peers in education around the world. No one quite does it this way, and it's really very effective. This combination of self-learning, what we call alone time, with the group work, back and forth, first of all, is very powerful because it's cost effective. Because when they're doing self-learning, they're supported by coaches who are typically our former students. They're not highly paid professionals. And so that becomes very affordable and scalable. The people leading the workshops are highly paid experts in their fields, but that happens only at certain times of the year. The other thing is that we found that especially kids who come from less privileged countries, they need that alone time before jumping into a group dynamic. they do need the time to build up their self-confidence, their skills, even their computer literacy, so that by the time they enter a workshop, they're on an even playing field, which otherwise would not be the case, and we would see them get marginalized. And so it becomes a very self-paced program in that way. And TUMO is also unique because it's so intense. Even though it is very flexible and very kind of student-centered, for the kids, it's stressful in a good way. It's like a video game. They have their video game face on where they're doing TUMO. It's like they're really fighting to get to the next level, just like they would in a game. They're very motivated, but it's not fun and games. It's hard work. And that's also a bit unique because a lot of these programs try to create a comfortable environment for students, which we also do, but we don't sacrifice the intensity of the learning outcomes in order to achieve that level of comfort. We do it the way video games do it, which is by motivating intrinsically and having kids kind of naturally put in the effort that gets them excited.
That's so curious as an educator for me. How do you inspire intrinsic motivation? You said like video games. How do you go about doing that?
Right. So these days we've been talking about a lot about motivation, both there's the golden currency of education. Like if somebody's motivated, you're all set. There's not much else you have to do. And then it's one of the best outcomes of an education. In other words, if somebody goes from being not very motivated, not very confident, to motivated initiative taker, that's an amazing outcome. That's going to serve them well. The way we do it is by giving them choice. So the reason we have so many different learning targets and so different from each other, like music and coding, for example, or AI and filmmaking, is because you need to give that level of choice for kids to be comfortable to engage on their own terms with the material they're interested in. Now, they often switch. We often see, like, typically it's a girl coming in saying, "Oh, I don't like computer programming. It's not for me." And the next thing you know, within a couple of months, they've discovered it, and that's all they want to do. The opposite happens too. So this ability to navigate from one area to another, but also to sort of stay away from topics that you don't feel comfortable with, is really one of the secrets. So if you're not comfortable drawing or coding or whatever, you don't have to do it. And so that way we have a kind of unfair advantage over schools where the program is set, it's standard, and everybody has to do everything. And so it's very hard sometimes to not lose that motivation.
Do you alluded to it? Do you typically see the more gender-based stereotypes in the demographics of TUMO, like where you'll see girls are a little bit more hesitant to start the coding, so you see a different demographic? I'm just curious, candidate in the TUMO.
Yeah. So what's nice is that we have about 45% girls to boy ratio coming in. It used to be more. The girls used to be more. There's a slight shift. I have a theory why, but we don't. It doesn't matter. It's about 50% girls, but yes, they do gravitate initially towards the typical area. So boys will do video games, girls will do photography. On average more. But then over time they start crossing over, and both ways. We have had parents who say, you ruined my kid's future. They were into physics. Now all they want to do is animation. And you have the opposite of saying, my also complaining, my girl is now cutting her hair short. She has her own ideas and she's coding. So kids find their.
How do you manage to get them to cross over? What do you think TUMO does differently to have them feel more comfortable?
Right. The two things. One, coming in, there's this illusion. Actually, it's not an illusion. It's a reality that if you want, you can gravitate towards what you're interested in. So there's no kind of intimidation of you have to do all these topics. Choose what you want. But then naturally, it's a very social environment. They see others doing things. It's a very transparent environment. I don't know if you've seen pictures of TUMO spaces, but they tend to be very transparent. Like you can look into workshops and see kids doing something very fascinating and start having kind of be envious of being in there. Also, these topics show up unexpectedly in different areas. For example, if you are doing, for example, you like 3D modeling, that becomes a gateway into video games because you're doing modeling there. Suddenly in video games, you're doing coding, you discover coding and you like it. And then you go into computer programming. So there are these gateway skill areas that combine the technical and the design aspects that end up being the crossover points for a lot of kids.
So interesting. But Pegor, how would you measure the success of TUMO? What kind of data have you collected? How do you measure its impact? How has it been transformational for the participants? Do you have longitudinal studies? How do you engage in data analysis regarding success?
Let me start by saying what we target. So we've always said we want TUMO to change kids' lives for the better. And although we target these very high level kind of soft skills, those are very difficult to measure. So we say, okay, they need to have academic success in school and university, career success, and also become more civically engaged and have kind of more values around solidarity and good civic skills, right? So those three things: school success, career success, and civic engagement. And so for the first time in 2023, there was a longitudinal study done of TUMO, because by that time, after, 12 years, we had kids who had been 16 when they joined like 12 years ago, and now have gone through university and are in the profession. So it was a good time to look at both our current students who are now in university, alumni, and alumni who are now in the workforce, right? And so there's a famous firm that does these types of studies. It's called Dalberg Advisory Services. It's kind of the McKinsey of the nonprofit world. It's probably the most famous one. And they decided to do an impact assessment. And it was a very rigorous scientific one. They selected randomly students from TUMO across the different demographic categories, whether it's gender or socioeconomic background, etc., age, different ages. And they did something very interesting. In order to have a good control group, they compared those students who had been with us for a year or more than a year to other TUMO students who had just joined. So they wanted to eliminate the self-selection bias of, they assume that because it's available to everybody, those who join might be different in terms of mentality from those who decide not to join. And so for the school comparison, which was very impressive, they were comparing TUMO students to TUMO students and seeing what's the difference in terms of 1 year of TUMO experience or more. And in fact, it turns out that TUMO kids were performing, or those who had a year of TUMO, were performing much better in school. Their grades tended to be significantly higher. Even in things like math, which we don't. Yeah, even in math, which we definitely don't teach math. We assumed school does that. They were doing better. I mean, it was a bit of a surprise because we were always afraid that kids who come to TUMO spend so much time with us that they're not doing their homework. And that's probably true, but it also turns out to be true that either because they're more motivated or they're more self-confident, they are performing better in school. This was a very rigorous result. They also compared TUMO alumni with non-TUMO university students. Now, the control group there was less rigorous because they picked just the general population in university students, those who had gone to TUMO and those who hadn't. And there the results were even more significant. They're 70% more likely to be in the top 10% of their class in terms of grades than non-TUMO students. And then in professional life, they were much more likely to work in tech. So I think 45% of TUMO graduates versus 20% of the general population work in tech. And as a result, of course, they make more money. That's that's kind of a side effect of working in tech, I guess. And so those were, oh, also on the civic engagement front, they were much more aware of international or global topics like whether it's climate change or regional conflicts that were going on at the time and so on. They seemed to be more aware and more interested, and they were lifelong learners. When asked, do you have a personal project? Do you take courses on Coursera or YouTube? They were much more likely to say yes. And so that gave us a big boost. After 12 years of saying, we're amazing, but not being sure if it's true, we realized maybe it is true. There is something that we're doing right.
Excellent. Excellent. So I'm curious if we can situate it a little bit outside of the program and now on its impact towards in Armenia. What is sort of the TUMO Armenia campaign?
Right. So at some point, it became clear that it was fundamentally unfair for some kids to have access to TUMO and others not, especially when these results were intuitively becoming obvious. And so Sam Simonian decided we're going to cover all of Armenia with TUMO centers. And we did this cluster analysis. We actually wrote some code that worked with Google Maps to decide where the centers should be for maximum optimal coverage. And we came up with a dozen centers, large centers, and over 100 TUMO boxes in villages surrounding them in order to reach everybody. And that was like $100 million project. But as a great sort of serial entrepreneur, Sam was like, no problem, we'll do it. Let's just start. So we started, and soon enough, we had enough funds to start construction on several of these centers. We're halfway through it. We now have, if you count Stepanakert, 7 centers. We lost Stepanakert, unfortunately. But we're now starting on 3 more. So now we have Kapan, Yereknatsor, Gümri, Dilijan, Yerevan, and what's the other one? One more. And we're about to start construction on Vanatsor, which is a big one, Masis, Armavir, and a couple others. So that's the TUMO Armenia project, and it's growing very fast. And it's coupled with our international expansion, I'm sure you're going to ask about.
That's exactly what I was going to ask about.
Okay. So we're lucky that we're expanding internationally, because that has a couple of really interesting advantages, but one of them is financial. When we open TUMO centers in Berlin and Paris and Frankfurt and so on, we charge an annual license fee to the people who are funding it. So a partner funds the TUMO center, let's say the city of Paris, right? Covers the costs of TUMO in Paris, but they also pay us an annual license fee. And those license fees are not trivial, and they add up to now it's one of the biggest revenue streams that we have, above grants and income from the building, is this franchise fees that we charge. And that's what needs to keep growing in order for us to keep growing in Armenia. The more we grow in Armenia, the more we need our international network to be bigger to supply us with the funds to sustain the operating costs going forward. So that's how those two are interlinked.
So it helps subsidize the cost for the centers in Armenia, as well as you're building local capacity at the same time.
That's right. So so when we fundraise, we like to direct the funds from our fundraising efforts to construction and buying equipment, and maybe the initial couple of years of operation. But then we don't want to be on a fundraising treadmill. And so our model, our strategy is to have the operating costs of these new TUMO centers be covered by our franchising revenues rather than by fundraising. So that way they can be sustainable long term.
So it's just
we're on track to go ahead, Annie.
No. It just becomes gravy. So the vision is really to build local capacity and to have these external centers subsidize the internal centers, and then any fundraising that happens would just be gravy that you could help add to the world class.
Not gravy, but covering the capex, let's say, the construction, which is not trivial. I mean, we're spending millions on construction. We wouldn't be able to generate that to our license fees. So that comes from fundraising.
Okay.
But it's great because it's a one-time thing, right? If somebody
Right.
is funding a construction of TUMO Center, they know that they're not on the hook to keep funding its operations forever, that we're going to be able to cover that through our international revenues.
Wonderful. And so would you say that's one of your largest challenges now, funding, or what would you say are some of the challenges that TUMO's facing today?
Well, funding is always a challenge, but I would say scaling. So we're now at a scale where we're experiencing all the typical growing pains that they tell you about, trying to kind of transition from this maverick startup mentality to more of something that can scale to, we have, I think, 800 employees now, are in like 16 locations, or if you count the boxes, much more than that. And our international centers are going to more than double in the next year and a half. So we're opening in Japan, in the US, in India, in Africa. It's really growing fast. So our challenge is to be able to make that transition to a more kind of large scale organization where you do see somebody walking around in the building that you don't recognize, which is a new experience for us.
So as a SoCal resident, I'm curious, you will recently, from what I understand, rumor has it that be opening a branch in Los Angeles, correct?
That's right.
And since LA has such a large Armenian community, will the branch in any way be different from any of your other branches, or, and if yes, yeah, how? I'm curious.
So it's going to open in September. All the TUMO centers branches are identical in terms of the pedagogy, in terms of the educational program. We've been successful at avoiding localizing things too much. We translate, of course, to different languages, but it's the same program. And it turns out teenagers have more in common just by virtue of being teenagers than any national or cultural differences. So it works out. In LA, it's likely that it will be the TUMO Center outside of Armenia that has the biggest Armenian population. We're trying to make sure that it's not only Armenians, because part of the idea is to give back to the general LA kind of population, to have Latinos and others. But already we have 700 pre-registered students, of which I think 30% are Armenian. And so let's see how that works out. We're trying to do it organically without any quotas, as we do everywhere. But otherwise, it will be just another TUMO Center similar to all the others.
Very curious about your expertise, especially in the area of AI, and considering the current rapid pace of change and the rise of AI and everything. I know when I'm grading papers, I'm constantly struggling. What would be an ideal educational vision for you, incorporating AI with TUMO, or how are you reacting to the emergence of AI with TUMO?
Right. Well, we're embracing it. So starting 2 years ago, we started investing a lot in AI in really three ways. One is to incorporate AI into all the traditional skill areas. So if you're doing graphic design, filmmaking, coding in a TUMO workshop, you're now starting to use AI tools, whether it's in Photoshop or it's recurse encoding, etc. So that and our workshop leaders are very quick to embrace those things. So that's happening almost organically. The challenge there is that the tools are changing so fast that we can't really codify it. So we're not writing curricula and rubrics anymore, because by the time we do, there's a new tool and it's a bit different. But having said that, that's the easy part. And then we introduced an AI skill area. So in addition to our 13 traditional ones, we have now a 14th generative AI skill area, which is much more technical and focused on creating AI agents. And finally, we're introducing AI into our software. So one of the kind of secrets of TUMO is our learning management software platform. And now we're introducing AI, so it becomes more conversational, and students generate their learning paths not just by announcing what their preferences are, like my first choice is graphic design, my second choice is this, or we adapt it by how fast they're going and so on. But now there'll be an AI bot kind of conversationally coaching them to say things like, there's a learning lab coming up in game development. I know you're really into that. You're not going to make it because you don't have the prerequisites. Would you consider switching your kind of learning path to include some prerequisites so you can make that learning lab, which is something a good coach should tell them, but now it'll be built into the platform. So those are the ways in which we're incorporating AI.
So interesting, scaffolding their learning experience. Pegor, I'm curious how you're marketing to attract more world centers.
Yeah, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but we haven't much.
Oh.
So it's been what they call inbound sales in the business development world. In other words, people come to us through word of mouth or during official visits, etc., and say we want a TUMO Center, and a conversation starts, and sometimes it leads to opening a new TUMO Center. We have only recently started deliberately doing business development. So we looked at the map and realized that all the TUMOs were in like developed countries. In Europe, like Germany, Portugal, France, in Spain, we're going to open a couple, Japan, the US, but not in the global south, not in India, not in African countries. And so we started putting special emphasis on that. And we even hired somebody in India as a regional director. And I think we're going to have our first TUMO soon in Mumbai as a result of our business development efforts. All the others are organic so far. And it's interesting. You remember how I told you that we opened TUMO partly as a reaction to the Soviet-style teaching in Armenia? It turns out all school systems are a little bit Soviet deep down, and people recognize that. So they really feel the need for something like TUMO to counteract that, whether it's in Berlin or LA or Takasaki.
I
So
mean,
that's helping us too.
we're all guilty. I'm guilty of lecturing too and doing it's so ingrained, it's years and years of socialization. It's very linear. It's very easy, in that sense, but it's very, I agree. Cyclical learning is so much more.
AI is disrupting that now.
Yeah.
So more and more it's becoming difficult to assume that students will accept to sit in a classroom where they really don't want to be, to go through something that a learning process that's not efficient for them, where they have AI solving things for them and kind of helping them out. So there might be a big disruption ahead. And I don't think it's good news because it's going to be pretty difficult to navigate that for school systems. But it's good news for TUMO because TUMO is kind of AI proof in that sense. We already don't rely on grades. There are no grades, no competition. There's no entrance exam. There's no diploma. And so naturally, we're kind of not immune, but compatible with this AI kind of revolution that's happening.
Beautiful. I'm getting some questions from the audience. So I'm going to open it up to the audience now, and I'll just go ahead and ask you. Some of these are easier than others. So we're being asked, what is the annual cost of TUMO? And do you come up with a budget when you can't, you come up with a set budget, or is it different for every center?
It's kind of different in every country. So in Armenia, it costs us around $18 per student per month on average. In Paris, it's maybe 5 times that, right? Because of the differences in salary levels, renting spaces, and how many hours per week people work. In Paris, they don't work much, so that ends up being quite expensive. So it really varies from place to place. We're in places like Tirana, where it's fairly affordable, and Berlin, where it's an expensive proposition. But in those countries, they compare the cost of TUMO to the cost of 1 hour of school time, and TUMO is much more cost efficient. So that it's an easy decision for funders to make in that sense.
Wonderful. Rebecca's, is Iran a consideration for TUMO?
Say again, is
Iran.
what again?
Iran.
That's yeah. So for the past 3 years, we've been having Iranian entities reach out to us to open TUMOs in Tehran and other cities. We've shied away from it. We tell them, please be patient because of the geopolitics around it. So if we're getting money from the state of California to open a TUMO in Los Angeles, if a lot of our funding is coming from American citizens making donations to a 501c3 in the US, and that money is kind of perceived as funding TUMO centers in Iran, that's a problem. So when we had a serious proposition of opening several, we actually reached out to the US State Department and said, look, this is a good idea, right? Because we're going to introduce kind of a much more open way, Western thinking, etc. And basically the advice was, you're free to do it. The sanctions don't apply to you. Don't do it. And so they highly discouraged us from doing it. And we're being very cautious about that. So it's no secret. I'm transparently sharing that. But we're very eager for one day the geopolitics to change and to be able to go to Iran as well. The same happened with Russia. We had a center in Russia, which we closed within Moscow. We had a center in Kiev, which closed because of the difficult situation. Hopefully, those will reopen as well. But right now, it's a sensitive area to go into.
Another question, have you thought about developing a whole school program, one that starts in pre-K through 12th, or even at a university level?
We often think about that. Look, schools have to adhere to education standards. So if you have a school, it's very hard to get away with saying, I'm not going to teach this 12-year-old to solve an equation with two equations with two unknowns or whatever. Whereas the TUMO pedagogy is based on giving the choice of, if you actually don't want to do that, you can do something else. You can kind of pursue your passion wherever it takes you. So we're not kind of better than schools in the sense that we're smarter or we're better at pedagogy. It's that we don't have that constraint. That's a big part of it. So it would be hard for us to open a school that's legal. Let's put it that way. We would probably violate some government norms. However, if educational policy changed enough, then I think a TUMO style school would be amazing. That the way, if you teach math and physics the way we do it, with self-learning and workshops, and it would be very effective, but it would require a fundamental shift in educational policy and law around education.
So interesting. The Department of Education of Armenia, I'm assuming, is involved with your efforts?
Yes, in the sense that we often talk, we coordinate. There's a complementarity where we track what they're teaching in school so that we don't have to cover those things. But it's basically that. It's an arm's length relationship. They assist us a lot. For example, when we put boxes in villages, we
Right.
almost always put them in the school, on school property, and it becomes available to schools in the morning hours when we don't use it. And so in that sense, there's a nice relationship, but not beyond that. So we don't kind of consult with them when we're developing pedagogy or curricula and things like that. Not directly.
Not yet. Let's see. We have another question. We have a question from Susan. She says, TUMO has filled an important need in Armenia. Now that TUMO has been so successful, what additional needs do you see that should be filled by another initiative, either by TUMO or by another group?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is to help schools evolve. Schooling in Armenia, I wouldn't say is dysfunctional, but it's not. I've had, as I said before, 5 kids go through all levels of the Armenian school systems. We're very proud of our education, but there's not that much basis for being proud. The schools are not producing the level that of kids, of alumni that corresponds to our self-image. It's kind of a cerebral, smart nation, kind of the nerd republic, as I like to call it. I think the main answer to that question is somebody needs to make a big effort to reform, or not reform, just improve primary and secondary schooling in Armenia. It's almost a crisis situation at this point. They're not doing well.
Would you say that's because of lack of evolution from the more traditional, or we can call it the Soviet era learning?
There is that. So the foundations of that kind of traditional elite schooling kind of approach, we're still relying on that. So we still have parents at home who have gone through that type of education and who help kids at home or set expectations. And so we're kind of still using up that reserve of excellence from the Soviet era that was there. But at this point, there's been underinvestment. There's a social kind of a general decline in kind of social capital. Teachers are not compensated or, let's say, treated very well in terms of their careers. Schools are under-resourced. There's all kinds of issues. And the problem is not the curriculum or the textbooks or anything like that. It's more how schools are managed, the cultural environment of the school, the social environment of the school is not what it used to be.
Can I push back?
Even things like punctuality.
Yes. Are you referring to the rigor of the social environment, or what in terms of the social environment?
Right. So, for example, the fact that as you get closer to university, in order to pass the high stakes exam for university entrance, you start relying on private tutors. And the whole school system is complicit in that they start tolerating kids not showing up in class because they understand that the education they're giving them is not going to get them into university. And so there's a whole system that tolerates this whole institution of private tutors, for example, in the last 3 levels of the high school, let's say. Things like that. So things around, that's what I mean by the social environment or the cultural environment of the school. It's a systemic issue. Also punctuality, teachers showing up on time, not canceling classes, things like that. You'd be surprised outside of sort of a dozen great schools in Yerevan, you'd be surprised how problematic it is, and lack of teachers.
What's the teacher education program look like? The credentialing programs or the teacher education programs?
Yeah, I'm not an expert. I mean, in that, I do know a bit about it, but basically, teachers come out of 2 different institutions. One is the Pedagogical Institute, which is a teacher training institution. I don't know exactly what they do there, but I do know that another avenue is you can come out of let's say, a biology faculty of a university specializing in teaching biology. So teachers can come out of the pedagogical school or from other universities which have pedagogy kind of majors, if you will.
Components to them, yeah. Okay.
But I'm not an expert in that. I know that Teach for Armenia, among others, is working very hard both to supplement the teacher body by channeling young people who haven't studied teaching into teaching, but also creating a kind of a layer of leaders, future leaders of the education system that can then start taking on the next kind of generation of teacher training, become deputy ministers, things like that. So that's one entity that would be much more knowledgeable and directly working in that area as well.
Does TUMO partner up with these entities, these different nonprofits? I know you partner up with governments because I've seen that, but any other kind of educational entities that TUMO partners up with officially?
We do. Look, to be honest, we always try to, and we do have interactions and so on, but each of us is so focused, so mission driven, that if TUMO has to kind of make changes in our program, or Teach for Armenia has to change the way they do training in other, for example, we had said, why don't we have Teach for Armenia, they call them fellows, I think, or teacher leaders in villages where they're teaching, also be kind of TUMO coaches, right? It makes sense. And on paper it looked great, but then the schedules had to be aligned, and they had to do it after school hours, whereas they would be tired because they're also doing school and so on. And so all those logistics, at some point you realize, you know what? Let's just each do our specialty. We're complementing each other anyway, without actually collaborating at a kind of a granular level. So we try to collaborate. In practice, it doesn't work very well, not for lack of trying or for competitiveness or territoriality, just because each one is so focused on their mission that it's hard to sacrifice that for the sake of synergies.
And you briefly mentioned, but I do want to highlight it, that all 5 of your children went through school in Armenia, correct? And I remember.
Yes. So.
Okay. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that. So I have my youngest kids are twins who basically went to school in Armenia from kindergarten all the way through high school, and 3 older boys who started in Glendale, in Shabazian, and then when we came to Armenia, went into primary, secondary, and high school levels, each of them.
Because I remember emceeing, and this is almost a decade ago, an AWA conference, and your wife was one of the honorees. And I just remember it being glued in my head that you had 5 children, and all 5 of them had gone to Ivy League schools, or really, really posh, wonderful programs. So it's very interesting to me, that hybrid experience. Or is it that they had educators as parents, or all of this other social capital that they've amassed through the years? But it was such a striking jackpot of just phenomenal educators. I mean, phenomenal educations that your children were able to achieve.
Well, when we moved to Armenia, we were very worried that we were going to ruin the future of our kids. They would kind of not have the careers that they might have if they had stayed in the US. But I think what happened was we were lucky for a certain type of student, the Armenian school system, that's very rigorous and almost overly difficult in terms of what math homework looks like, for example, does build very competitive graduates when it comes to taking the SAT, or being the right profile for applying to an Ivy League. That combined with the fact that so these schools, at least back then, were very big on diversity. So they liked the fact that they had a student from a place called Armenia that didn't happen very often. I think that helped. I like to think that what we did at home would have helped too, but that's Armenia was so when they compared themselves to their classmates in Glendale who had stayed in the California school system,
Yeah.
they were more sophisticated, more mature, just by virtue of growing up in a place like Armenia that is a little more gritty, is a little more old style, if you will, old world. That did give them an advantage, I think.
And I'm sure their parents helped. I have a question here by Huri. I'd love to ask, have you considered opening TUMO centers in the Middle East, like Buj Hamud, Anjar, Aleppo, Syria?
Yes, we're opening one. We had one in Beirut.
Oh.
It closed down after the big blast of the port blast. It was damaged and it was a weird time. And we kind of took advantage of that. We're opening one. It's under construction now, right next to Burchamut, a very big one, free of charge. Probably in spring of next year is going to be in their inauguration. So that's one case that's happening. Yes, I think the Middle East is very attractive. We've looked at Abu Dhabi and the other Gulf countries. So a lot of conversations, nothing concrete yet. The one that's definitely happening is Beirut, next to Burchamut.
Fantastic. She also asks, when you say games, what types of games have been considered and achieved? Examples from Armenian stories, Hovannes Tumanyan and others?
No, when I say, well, it's interesting. So we don't explicitly in Armenia focus on Armenian content. And this is something we've been criticized for. Why don't you teach Armenian culture, etc.? But the nice thing is that it happens naturally, right? So just as an anecdote, I don't know if this is answering Huri's question directly, but it's an interesting story. We had a team, a group of friends who were very much into animation at TUMO. And when they opened the studio and started producing animations, all the themes were Armenian themes, everything from local Yerevan topics to the life of Mesrop Mashtots, for example. They imagined Mashtots as an entrepreneur, kind of reimagined him as a kind of startup founder, if you will, inventing the Armenian alphabet and so on. So naturally, they do gravitate towards Armenian themes. But as far as games, what I was referring to more is that by analogy, the TUMO program is a little bit like, it's not gamified, but it does motivate kids in the same way that they're motivated when they're playing a video game in terms of leveling up, let's say.
Wonderful. And she asks as well, if there are no diplomas, are there certificates that TUMO hands out or some sort of certificate of completion or anything?
What we have instead is a portfolio. So everything, every animation, every kind of mobile app that a kid develops during their workshops, especially, that's uploaded to their personal webpage. It's called a portfolio. And that becomes a living diploma. So when they apply, whether they're trying to impress somebody or applying for a job or applying to university, they can show their work. And that plays the role of the certificate or the diploma. Other than that, no, we don't have a formal, let's say, piece of paper or anything like that. And more employers especially are not looking for that. They're looking for, what have you done? Show me your GitHub. Show me your portfolio. And that's what they have.
Thank you. David asks, if TUMO has a huge donation specifically earmarked for construction of a new physical site location, just like the one in Yerevan, would you build the second full-scale center inside or near Yerevan? Or would you take it somewhere else in Armenia, say near Gumri or in the south?
Right. So right now, our priority is outside of Yerevan, even though it really makes sense to have a second center in Yerevan. That's where half the population is, and we have a huge waiting list in Yerevan. But we think that the consideration of being equitable and reaching all parts of Armenia probably overrides that. So our priority first is to go to Vanatsor, to Hrazdan, to Goris. And so we have centers in the south. We have one in Kapan now, a very big and beautiful one. But before coming to Yerevan, we're probably going to build 5 or 6 more in the regions, and then maybe our 12th center will be in Yerevan, number 2, if you will. So priority is for the regions now.
Okay. Wonderful. Other questions or comments that you would like to make, Pegor?
Just to say that the resources we built up have helped us take on other initiatives, which are, I think, very interesting. Sometimes we're accused of doing too many things at the same time, but I think that's fine. Google does that. Why not us? So in particular, one thing I'd like to kind of talk about, I think will be interesting for people. You may have heard about this. So after the Second Qarabağ War, when we were obliged to hand over territories as we were retreating, as part of the armistice, people started getting worried that we were going to lose all these churches and monuments, and we may not be able to protect them from vandalism and from kind of reinterpretation of history and things like that. And by that time, TUMO had done several workshops with teenagers around scanning monuments, so doing laser scanning and photogrammetry of large churches and so on with very high accuracy, where you could actually reconstruct the whole thing digitally. And so we formed a couple of teams and went and scanned close to 50 monuments. As the army was retreating, we were retreating with them, scanning monuments, and we scanned quite a few of them. And then before the blockade, with the part of Artsakh that was under our control, we scanned another 100, I think. And so we have this huge database of these very detailed archives that can be used for restoration or documentation. And now we got a big grant and are scanning everything in Armenia as well. And interestingly, there's something called the Venice Architecture Biennale, which is like one of the biggest architecture shows. And Armenia's pavilion this year, each country has their own pavilion. We're using these 3D scanned sort of models to train an AI model to be able to produce Armenian architecture, pieces of Armenian architecture. And so we're producing new pieces of kind of historic architecture and carving them in stone and displaying those pieces as a kind of a statement on whether or not you can really preserve something that you don't have access to, and kind of thinking about how AI can play into that. So that's just an example for us that's very kind of satisfying of a program that started by training TUMO kids in something that they love to do, like digital scanning, then became a real resource when there was an emergency to mobilize these kids who are now young adults to be able to do this work. So we are seeing kind of the fruits of our labor, if you will, in ways that are very, very satisfying to us personally.
So rich in so many aspects. One more question. Sorry, a couple more that just popped up. Aerospace. Are there any avenues for industry professionals for aerospace or space to contribute to TUMO Center?
Yes. So I briefly mentioned that TUMO has 3 modalities: so self-learning, workshops, and the third one is what we call learning labs, which is when we invite professionals from different fields to come and run small workshops, we call them labs, with kids who have benefited from, let's say, they know coding, they know 3D modeling, they have the background to participate in a aerospace related workshop, for example. And so, yes, we have had many Armenians come, even non-Armenians, from JPL and NASA, and actually run aerospace learning labs. And we'd love to do more. So if anyone wants to volunteer 2 weeks of their time, it's a minimum of 2 weeks, to come to Armenia. We'll give you a dozen brilliant kids, and you can work with them for that on a lab.
Amazing offer. Hopefully you'll get some calls from this. What's the best way for people to connect with you, Pegor?
Well, I can share my email. It's very simple. It's my Pegor.Papazian with an I, first name dot last name at tumo.org. Please send me an email.
Put it in the chat right now. There's also a comment saying, Dr. Papazian saying, are you aware about the research in Armenian architecture, that they do a lot of digitization of monuments, etc.?
Yes, we are, and we talk to them. Our database now is by far the largest. It's been inspired, and it's kind of stands on the shoulders of these kind of institutions who have done it before us and are still doing it to some extent. But now our goal is to put everything we have done in terms of scanning into an open access database to make it available to all researchers, because our job was to do this technical aspect, but then we're not in the business, if you will, of cultural preservation and so on. So we expect others to pick that up, and we very soon will launch a platform where people will be able to access and download these models.
You're getting also a number of accolades. We all share gratitude in the work that you're doing. Congrats, really, on your great work of helping Armenian youth to perform well in the fourth industrial revolution. Congrats from Ruben Jigian, Levan Marshalian. Thank you, Pegor, for a very informative presentation. I learned so much more about TUMO, and that is echoed in all of our sentiments. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank you, Pegor Papazian, for taking these questions, hard questions, easy questions, all the questions, and to all of you for investing your time and watching today. We thank you from the ARPA Institute, and I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Papazian.
Thank you very much, Ani, and thank you, Pegor, for this excellent presentation. And I'm sure people will be watching the video, a lot more people, and they will learn more about what TUMO is all about and what you guys do, which is an excellent activity in Armenia. Our next event will also be another discussion in Armenian. Հայերենով պիտի լա եւ պիտի լա մայիս 17-ին ժամը 11-ին title վերնակիրն է ուրեմն պատմություն դեր Հովհաննիսի Թումաջանյան ներողություն, որ զամս 30-ի գյանս յուր շրջեցավ Եվրոպա, Ասիա, ի Հնդիգս եւ ի Աֆրիկե, ի Հաբեշստան, եւ ուրեմն ներկայացնողն է Մերուժան Ղարաբեդյան եւ Էրիս Թեջիրյան, եւ իրենք են հեղինակը այդ գիրքին, մոտ 1000 էշնոց գիրք մնե, որ գվերլուծե ուրեմն Թովմաջանյանի ճամփորդությունները համաշխարհային, որ շատ կարևոր դերակցություն է ոչ թե միայն հայկական պատմության հետ կապված, այլ նաև համաշխարհային պատմության հետ կապված։ Եվ զրուցավարը պիտի լա պրոֆեսոր Սեբու Ասլանյան, UCLA-ի պատմության ղեկավար, հայ պատմության, հայոց պատմության։ Ուրեմն հուսամ կմիանաք մայիս 17-ին, շնորհակալություն բոլորիդ եւ ցտեսություն։